Hello out there! Welcome to another live session here with Autocorp. My name is Daniel. I am a writing coach and instructor and editor. I do a lot of things around here at Autocorp. If you're not familiar with Autocorp, we are an online resource for authors, including our fully functional writing desk where you can plan, write, and edit your manuscript, an online community, and an online academy with educational offerings to help you become the best writer you can be. Educational offering, kind of like what we're going to talk about today, which is subtext in dialogue. We're going to discuss how to make sure that your dialogue isn't too on the nose, that it keeps the audience's interest, and that you include as much information as you can, but in that subtle way. So, Tammy has some news. Go ahead, Tammy. Give me some news. I love the community here. Always ready to just jump in. But before I talk about my topic today, I wanted to reiterate the challenge we have going on right now, which is the Character Connection Challenge. So if you have not signed up, please sign up. Yeah, right there. It is free. It is a free challenge to sign up for, and you still have some time to create your work for it that you can submit. The deadline is going to be on Sunday, but you're only having to write 1,000 words, so you could very easily put that together as well. Of course, people are asking, where do you submit? The link is not out yet, but if you've signed up for the challenge, it will come through the email, and we'll also be posting it in the community as well. Tammy says she has a writing accomplishment. A large group of homeschooled kids use her monthly astronomy article in their studies. That's awesome. Fantastic. I mean, I love the fact we have such a diverse community. We have people using Autocorp for fiction, for nonfiction. We have writers that do memoirs and writers writing horror, right? Just all different types of writing. And sure, I love the power of words. I love talking about the power of words. So yeah. But character connection is the challenge going on currently. Let me go ahead and move that a little bit straight off center there. Character connection is the challenge going on currently. And what we are tasking you to do, it's very simple. We just want you to write 1,000 words, like a little scene, a little moment, and it's two people or two characters, doesn't have to be humans, two characters who have not met before, and by the end of this scene, end of these 1,000 words, we have a sense of their connection. It could be positive, it could be negative, it could be, probably not indifferent because you're not going to be able to really tell that, positive or negative, but it could be all different kinds of connections. And if you didn't check it out, last week, we talked about different connections, different relationships characters can have with one another. So if you want to think outside the box and maybe don't just do a meet cute, nothing wrong with that. I love meet cute. It's very romantic. But if you don't want to just do a romantic meet cute, then maybe you can go back to the last week and you can come up with maybe some other types of relationships that they may have. But it's very simple. You just need 1,000 words, and you'll get the submission link there below through the email if you sign up there below. So that is a lot of fun. The deadline is this Sunday. Yes, the rules, it's simple. You just need 1,000 words. You don't need to worry about formatting or anything complicated like that. We gave you a very broad topic, and the deadline is going to be this Sunday. So please, as soon as that link goes out today, try to do it as soon as you can. Don't forget about it, because otherwise, you might have a problem there. Somebody said the link was having trouble. Let me just make sure that that link is currently activated and we do not have a problem with it right now. Just a minute. I'm seeing it myself, so I'm guessing that was something on your end. I'll go ahead and pop it in the chat, though, because that'll make it a little bit easier. All right. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is subtext. Yes, this is what you came in here for. Dialogue, subtext. Dialogue is one of the most challenging things to write because, writing dialogue, you want to balance that realism. You want to balance the information you want to come across, but you also need to make it entertaining. Like, it has to do a lot of things at the same time in order to be the most efficient use of words, right? And this is something we're always fighting for in Autocorp, is to make sure that every word earns its spot on the page. And in dialogue, this is particularly true. There's something about putting words in those quotation marks that make them stand out. We generally like, I don't know, that tends to make them land. It tends to highlight them. It almost feels like you're putting them in bold when you do that, at least to me. I often remember a lot more that's in the dialogue than I do in the narrative prose. I think partly because I'm more audio based in my learning, but it could vary. But I think it's very important that we focus on dialogue and making it effective. It is very easy to fall into lazy dialogue. This is dialogue where you have the "as you know," and they say things that the other character would already know, and then you're like, well, "Why are you saying all this?" And it's like, well, it's plot exposition. It has to go somewhere, right? To quote the great Muppet Caper. But you don't want to do that, right? You don't want to. You hear the advice of don't include too much exposition, don't include too much info dumping, and then you say, oh, well, I'm not going to put that in my narrative. I'm just going to put that in the dialogue, and that'll hide it. No, because generally people don't just spell everything out. They don't just explain everything. In fact, that's really kind of boring. Often what imagine you have a story and you could have somebody sit down and just tell the story of what happened to them. Or we could actually go to that scene and see it firsthand. Generally speaking, you want to do the latter, right? Because somebody retelling the story is not as interesting as being in the story. So subtext is very important when you're writing dialogue, because it's a way to include more information than what is at a first glance, right? There are multiple meanings to sentences. Every word carries multiple uses. Not every word, but the words carry multiple uses, and so they're really earning their spot on the page. So rather than just conveying that the person is angry, it could also be conveying things like what the problem is in the situation, how specifically they express anger, whether or not they're hiding information from the other person. There's so many other things that it can do besides just the one thing that maybe you're particularly concerned about. So let's go through some tips about writing subtext in dialogue. One thing that constantly comes up, a constant technique, is the analogy. So this is where somebody, instead of saying what it is they're going to say directly, they use an analogy. The classic example of this is when the villain will tell some sort of metaphor story, right? It'll be like, there was once a tree in my backyard, and it grew, and then it grew so big it started to spread over my house, and I was worried one day that branch would fall and hit my roof and it'd bring my house come toppling down, so of course I had to remove it. And it's like, well, are they talking about a tree, or are they talking about a rival that they're concerned about will overtake them, right? This could be a fun way of of putting in subtext. Now you're like, how subtle is that? Isn't that really like text in a different form? It can be, but what it tells you is that the main character, or whoever's saying those words, is not going to directly imply this, right? They're not going to directly threaten. They're going to do it in an indirect way. Why would they do that? Well, there could be reasons: plausible deniability, artistic flourish. Maybe they like to tease the person. It tells you something about their character, right? Just because I'm saying subtext doesn't mean this is something that is so subtle the audience isn't picking up on it. It can even be rather obvious, right? Well, we'll get into other examples in a minute, but a lot of these examples, when I bring them up, you might wonder and might say, well, wait a minute, Daniel, how subtle is that? And again, the point is not that you aren't picking up on the hidden meaning. The point is that it's just not explicitly the only thing being talked about, right? It gives you multiple dimensions, multiple ways of getting at the same concept. And so it's accomplishing more, it's more interesting, et cetera, et cetera. It's also more natural. because a lot of times we don't really directly say what we want to say for lots of reasons, emotional reasons, courage on our behalf, not wanting to offend. Maybe we want to be able to obfuscate our meaning. Maybe we want to be able to take it back easier or tell the other person that they're confused when they're not, things like that, And so it does come across more natural too when people aren't just on the nose. So there's a few reasons I would say to break it down. The 3 reasons would be that it's more interesting to read. It's more artistically interesting rather than spelling it out because you're not just summarizing. You're making the audience do a little bit of work. That it's more natural to read, and then it ultimately will mean you're getting more things accomplished at the same time. So those are the 3 things. All right. Background information. Background information before the conversation can happen can give the whole conversation different subtext, right? And then we know it. This is irony, basically. But this is a way for us to get that subtext in advance. So sometimes what you do is you demonstrate attitude that the character has. So if another character comes in, character B comes in and character A is like rolling their eyes and like, ugh. And then character B is like, how are you doing? And they're like, oh, I always love seeing you and all this. Well, that actually there's more going on. But what does that tell you? It tells you that that character A is not courageous enough to tell character B that they don't like them very much, perhaps, or is going to lie to get what they need, or things like that, right? It's getting a lot more done than if you just set it on the nose. Now, you might have characters that are willing to do that, right? They're just that blunt, right? But like I said, a lot of people are not. And so when we have that background information in advance and we put them in the situation and we understand all that subtext, well, it allows that conversation to be a lot more interesting. Hyperbole. This is a popular way of showing subtext. When you have people say things that are quite exaggerated, well, there's a subtext to that, right? The subtext could be that they're very excited about it, so they're over exaggerating. It could be that maybe they're very angry, right? It's an emotional exclamation point on what they're doing. So if they're like, this is the most important thing ever, well, obviously they don't really think that, right? That's not literally true. But what it does tell you is how important they think it is, that it is very important to them, right? Or, you never say this. Well, no, that's not really true either. That's hyperbole. But what that tells you is that it comes across in that way. And so, again, rather than people maybe literally saying what they feel, which is, this is too often a problem. Well, that's not generally how people say things, right? They'll say, you're always doing this, right? And again, that's where you get to the more natural element of human speech. We're often including this sort of subtext in it. But when you have those sort of conversations with somebody else, you often can pick up on that subtext that, okay, they don't actually mean this literally. What they're meaning is that emotionally, that's how it comes across. And understatements are also true. Understatements is another way this happens. So somebody comes in and they have a really ugly dress on and they're like, oh, well, that's interesting. And it's like, well, no, they actually think it's a train wreck, but they're not going to state it that way, right? And understatement can end up making a much more interesting sentence to describe extreme emotions than if they literally leaned into the extreme emotion and spelled it out to the audience. It could be funny. And again, it tells you something about the character. It tells you that this is a person that doesn't feel empowered to really speak their mind or how they get around things. And so it can do multiple things at the same time. Repetition and focus. All right, this is something that's more subtle. This is something that maybe audiences wouldn't even always pick up on. So there's a thing in human psychology where the more you talk about something, the more important it becomes to you. This is why people will tell you to do like mantras and stuff to try to focus your mind, right? They'll say like, tell yourself you're a great person so many times or whatever it is, right? Just because you can sort of cheat yourself into thinking something is more important simply by talking about it more. It's one reason why narcissistic people talk about themselves a lot. It reveals that that's on their mind a lot, but they're also trying to influence you to think about them a lot as well. So when it comes to repetition, what you will notice is the topic that the person is fixated on shows you where their attention is. And this can be helpful because they may not be trying to tell you that, but you know that, right? So if a character is constantly bringing up something that doesn't seem very important, like I'm trying to think of a good example, but like imagine they're constantly talking about like their car or something like that. Well, that would imply there's something about the car that's capturing their attention. And maybe they're not explicitly telling you that. They're not saying, I'm really worried that my car is going to break down, right? But what they might constantly say is, well, you know, our car, they might say, you know, I don't really want to like risk my car. And they're like, you know, cars have a tendency to break down. And like, you know, and depending on how you're implementing this, this can either be pretty subtle or it could be really obvious. In a subtle way, you could actually introduce this in a way where an audience may not even pick it up all the time. Because, for example, if the person is constantly framing everything in the context of power dynamics, right? If that's just their bias and they're constantly framing things that way, then that could be a subtext in their conversations throughout the whole story. And some people might pick up on it. They might pick up on it subconsciously, but some people will just miss it altogether, you know, or maybe they'll pick it up subconsciously and not be aware of it. But it's something that you can bury if you want, you know, and have it kind of be a hidden thing if you're really reading into it. Like during a surprise proposal, a guy keeps talking about the dessert. Perhaps, right? Sometimes it's like a distraction technique, right? And they're trying to focus your attention. That's a little bit different. That's more something I'm going to be talking about a little bit later. The car could represent safety and stability. Is repetition a form of gaslighting? Yes, it can be, right? Bosses will do this sometimes with employees, right? They'll constantly use particular language regarding your job to try to like brainwash you about it. And there's persuasion techniques like this. You constantly will use particular positive words, and you try to associate them. So you just always put them together. And a lot of people will use these techniques without even thinking about it. You don't have to be some sort of brilliant mastermind or some sort of like sociopath or something in order to manipulate people that way. It's just we've kind of picked up on this as a sort of thing that you want to do. So, you know, somebody who's constantly talking about like the fragile state of things tells you something. Maybe it tells you that they have anxiety or things like that. There are ways to do this. And this is, like I said, this is something that can be quite subtle and it's worth playing with. All right. Pauses and trains of thought. Okay. If somebody asks a question and there's a pause, the implication is it's hard to answer, right? That's kind of obvious. If they completely change the subject, that either tells you that they don't find it easy to answer or they don't want to answer. The same thing can happen in conversation in a more subtle way. It doesn't always have to be that obvious, although it can be, right? You can literally have somebody, it's like, tell me the truth. Do you love me or not? And they're like, well, and you're like, well, that's terrible, right? Like there's a lot of subtext to that. Even if what they answer is, yes, of course I do. Well, yes, of course I. The fact that there was a pause, there's subtext in there, right? But it could be as simple as they're talking about something and then they switch the subject, and their subtext could be is that, well, they don't really like how the conversation is going and they're pivoting. And how obvious that you want to make that to the audience that it's like a, you know, kind of moment is really up to you, because people do this in both really obvious ways and subtle ways. If you do it too subtly, then you could wonder, well, do they just have nothing to say or something like that? And so, yeah, you do need to be careful about that. But often you can put in subtext about what it is that somebody's interested in, what they're comfortable about, how they're feeling, by simply how quick they're responding, how comfortable they are in responding, and whether or not they're staying on course and not pivoting too much. They could be gathering their thoughts, though, but that tells you something about the character too. There's subtext to that, right? So if you have somebody and they say, well, what's the best plan, Jack? And Jack's like, let me think about that. Well, that tells you that there's somebody who's thoughtful, who wants to think about that. I mean, and you don't even have to have the think about that, right? You could just have the or you could have Jack sat back for a moment, and that tells you, oh, well, that's somebody that thinks things through. He's not just going to impulsively make a decision, right? On the other hand, the flip side is somewhat true. what's the plan? And they're immediately like, we need to blah, 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 blah. Well, it could be that they're just really sharp and they've thought it all through in advance. Or it could be what you're trying to say in the subtext is that they are impulsive and they move too quickly. And all of this is, going to blow up in their face. Focused on things. That's another thing, right? Yes, that's the train of thought. If you have somebody ask them a question and then they're actually talking about something else, and it's not like they're trying to change the subject. It's more just they were thinking about something else. Again, that's the subtext, right? So if they're like somebody's like, wow, this is a weird weather they're having. And the guy's like, wow, the prices at this restaurant are really expensive. It's not like he didn't want to talk about the weather. It's just he maybe didn't even hear what the other person had to say, or that's what was on that person's mind. And so again, you can have that kind of crosstalk, and it can tell you a lot of subtext without the person saying, I didn't hear what you had to say. Oh, by the way, did you notice the prices here are really high? This is what we're trying to avoid, that sort of stilted conversation. We're trying to make it sound more natural. Is this just text and back and forth dialogue? Well, sometimes the subtext can come through the body language, like I said, especially with pauses and trains of thought. You might have the ellipsis points, or like I said, you could have they sat back, you stroke their beard, whatever it is, and that just tells you there was a pause. There's varying ways you can demonstrate that. Most of this, though, is going to be inside the quotation marks. Euphemisms. Yes. Why do we use euphemisms? Because we don't want to say the obvious, right? We don't want to be explicit in what we're talking about. So what this usually tells you is that what is being talked about is either a taboo, it's a little bit uncomfortable, perhaps they're trying to be delicate in how they talk about it. And this is usually a pretty obvious one. This is not one where it's really subtle. He who must not be named or something. It's like, okay, it's pretty obvious what that means. You're terrified of saying that name. So this is not one you're going to include in and think you're being coy or something like that. However, it is natural. This is what people often do. Kennywood's open. That's pretty funny. It's a little more of an innuendo, but yes, the idea is that you're trying to, more in a comedic way, tell somebody their fly is open, right? Things like that. You'll notice, though, this happens a lot in like political language, right? People will have their euphemisms and other people will bash them for it because they'll say, well, you're using this political label because you just don't want to state what you really think. And this is on all ends of the spectrum. This happens in religion. Like I said, this usually happens sexual stuff. This usually happens in taboo topics. But for your characters, it could happen maybe for other characters they don't like. Again, the Voldemort example. Not hurting their feelings. Correct. Sometimes you do this around children, right? And sometimes it's just out of kind of a respect. It's not being blunt. Like we say, people passed away versus that they died. That tells you a certain amount of weight. There's a subtext to that about the weight of death that we don't just say, well, they died. Often we don't. We'll say they passed away because, again, that gives it tells you something about the psychology of the person behind it. So this is where euphemism can be helpful, particularly in world building. So if you're a sci-fi writer, if you're a fantasy writer, euphemisms are a great way of showing in your society what are the taboo topics. So keep that in mind. It can be a lot of fun. This is a great way of using specific language to your world without it just being thrown in just for the fun of it. Because it has extra meaning involved as well. Multiple meanings, yes. Keep in mind that language, often words do have multiple meanings. And keep in mind that you could accidentally put in subtext that you didn't mean to have. This can particularly be true with generic descriptions. And if you have access to the writer's desk, if you're a pro member at Autocorp, you can go into the writer's desk and you can run that report and you can see generic descriptions. And generic descriptions can create a problem where you're vague and then people don't know. So if you say, how was the movie? And they're like, well, it was good. It's like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean they're trying to be like clever because it was okay, it was not good, and they don't want to tell you? So often when you're doing this sort of thing, like a word like good, which has multiple meanings, it can mean It's good as in it's serviceable. It's good as in it's morally good. It's good at, it's good as in it's not bad. What you want to do is you'll want to have some surrounding context. So if you have, how was the movie? She rolled her eyes. It was good. It's like, no, it wasn't. Like, liar. But again, it's generally how people talk. Inflection in voice affects the meaning. Exactly. How do you do that in dialogue? This is something where actors have the benefit of doing it in screenplays and things like that, or on the stage. You have to figure out how to get that inflection. So how do you do it? With the body language, right? If you're smiling, you say things differently than not if you're slumped or whatever. So like, keep that in mind. Also keep in mind when you throw in that extra body language, when you throw in that extra context, try to do it before the dialogue, because otherwise what you'll do is a double take. So imagine you said, how is the movie? And the person says, it was good. She rolled her eyes. Well, you probably have to go back and go, oh, she meant that she didn't like it all that much and she was hiding it, right? Where if you say, how is the movie? She rolled her eyes. It was good. Well, it's clear on the first pass that they're being coy, right? Exactly. Somebody was asking me something here, and I'm trying to figure this out. Ellipsis versus M dash. Oh, that's a really great question. I learned in a writing course the ellipsis was wrong punctuation for delay, that an M dash was a way to indicate a pause or trail off. Generally speaking, ellipsis is used for pauses within a point. So it's like, I don't know. Perhaps we should, then you would do an ellipsis. But if it's, I don't know, maybe but how about if you're doing that kind of like your squirrel moments, those are M dashes, because what you're doing is you're cutting yourself off. If somebody trails off and somebody else cuts them off, that's also an M dash. So if it's, Jack turned to the window, I think the best plan is we really should, and it's somebody else talking, right? They're interrupting him, then that would be an M dash as well. Ellipsis is like within the thought they're trailing off, or it means you're leaving out information. like things are getting cut off. But like if it's but if it's like it's going back and forth, that would be a M dash for sure. All right. So yes, multiple meanings. Be wary of them, but they can be to your help. Personification. Yes. We often will personify things, and that will give us a subtext to things. So for example, the way you talk about your car, the way you talk about your toaster, the way you talk about your couch reveals a lot of subtext about it, because you'll start to use personification words, right? It's like if you, because you're not speaking literally, right? If you're like, I get along well with my car. It's like, well, that's not a literal statement. But what you're doing by personifying it is you're showing basically how you feel about it, if that makes sense. And so that's something to keep in mind in terms of subtext, is personification. You also do that with ideas, right? As well. You'll tend to personify them. You'll just be like, be careful with that. It'll creep up on you, or things like that. And again, that's a very different sort of thing. All right. So when it comes to relationships, there are so many different types of relationships in books. There's positive, there's negative, and I've been going through workshops this month. We just finished up the love section, like positive relationships. And next we're going to be doing hate. Hate relationships. So if you would like to go into a deep dive into hateful relationships, you can sign up for the hate workshop. It's there below. It's going to be on Thursday and Sunday this week, and it's the same session, more or less. I don't work off the strict script. I don't like that. I like to be loose, but it's going to be the same slide deck. Thursday and Sunday. Thursday at 1 p.m., Sunday at 7 p.m. And it's really quite intense. It's been very fun putting it together, because I've really tried to look at the high level abstract, how do these relationships work? So it can work if you're writing a romance, or if you're not, if you're writing sci-fi, if you're writing memoirs, it really doesn't matter, because this is high level stuff. And I've been having so much fun with that. Now, if you're an Autocorp Pro member, remember we have our clubs, like our fantasy club. Tonight at 7 p.m., I'm going to be talking about mythology in fantasy and how do you incorporate it well. We also have our horror club tomorrow at 6 p.m. on Wednesday. Gareth is going to be discussing your scenes with you. If you have something that you find a little bit problematic, like it's not working for you, it's a little broken, you can go ahead and join in there. And he will give you some real-time feedback on some of your materials. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Go ahead and sign up for that in the schedule there. We have our accountability clubs every week. That's where I come in and I beat you with it. No, I say, hey, how are you doing? Did you have a good week? Did you have a bad week? Let's have a better week. It's fun. I get to be little like coach, like, you know, exercise coach. And we do little exercises. Literally, we do like, and then we do a little writing sprint. And it's a great way to kick off your week. We do that at 11 a.m. and 8 p.m. on Mondays. And again, all of these are part of our Autocorp Pro membership. So feel free to sign up for that. Great deals going on right now. $15 for your first month. If you sign up for the challenge, you'll see that when you sign in at the main page. When is the deadline for this contest? It is Sunday. Sunday at 11:59 Eastern will be the cutoff. Thank you. One of the best account you built some me too. I'm so grateful for that. I try to do what I would want as a writer, right? Because so many, the one thing is, I'm gonna talk to our community. The one thing about a lot of things for writers is that they kind of waste your time. And I don't want to be mean on other people trying to help writers. I'm just saying that a lot of times people are not cognizant of time because time is so precious as a writer, right? So you get all excited and you go to this writing thing and then they kind of chit chat and they waste time and it's okay. Small talk is all right to a certain extent, but I really try to like cut to the chase, get you going, move it. And, people are talking about how great the productivity is from the accountability club. So I am really happy to see that. And please continue. I've been getting comments about how to make it even better. Please continue to do so because, yeah, that's what we're all about, right? All things are welcome. So true. So true. Especially the evening one. Don't like mornings. I don't really blame you, but, you know, it is what it is. You have so many new ideas from the Accountability Club. Very different for me. Love it. Awesome. Last week's Horror Club was a lot of commentary. It was fun. Fantastic. See, I love the Autocorp community. What can I say? But if you have any suggestions for the Autocorp community or for this YouTube channel, please comment below and let us know. Please like and subscribe to this channel. We'll continue to do educational content on here as well because we're just trying to help writers in any different ways. There will be a link to submit your character connection challenge. I get that question a lot. It will come through your email. And if you're an Autocorp Pro member, it'll be in the community as well. So don't worry, it'll be easy to find. It's going to be coming up in just a little bit. Good session. Thank you so much. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time either. So I'm going to wrap things up. Next week, though, it's going to be fun. We're going to get to see the finalists. Yay! And if you haven't seen the finalists before, it's a great session. I come on here. I get to do my radio voice and I get to read all these great finalists. And it's a blast. And then you all get to vote on the winner. So you please show up if you can at 1 p.m. next week. And you can be involved in picking the winner. That's great. I love being able to give it to the audience as well. For the scene challenge, is it okay to include the two characters' point of view? Do you mean head hop? That's a little bit challenging to do in 1,000 words, so I wouldn't recommend it, but I can't tell you you can't. So, absolutely. It is a literal fight for me to write or attend any lives for it. So I appreciate you more than you can do for all your help. You're welcome. You can hear the drum roll too. I love it. All right. Anyway, yes. So we'll be here next week to discuss that and to show off all these finalists. If you haven't, though, go back and check out the finalists for the Start Strong Challenge and the Write Fright Challenge. You'll get a lot of inspiration, some wonderful writers here in this community, really cool, all different genres, horror, romance, it's just all over the place, and I always have a blast. Anyway, I will see you around the Autocorp community. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye, everybody. See you.